Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. We finally got the upgrade and a new uniform for Hawkeye, the final Avenger, quote unquote. So obviously with that I will be testing him in PvE and PvP for this video. And then for the following videos you'll see the testing that I did for Kate Bishop and Echo's new uniform, which I believe is called Maya Lopez, according to the show. A little bit of a spoiler from the results of the testing that I got. Hawkeye seems to be ahead of the other three characters in terms of PvE, but ironically enough, even though his kit is more oriented towards PvP in a sense, having that iframe ignore counter built in, he did seem to be a little bit more inconsistent compared to Kate Bishop in PvP. But you'll see what I mean from the testing in timeline that I show a little bit later on in the video. That included Maya Lopez, or Echo's new uniform, is actually pretty good and consistent in PvP as well, and you'll see that in the later videos. This update has been pretty amazing in terms of the quality of life changes. The story mode auto is actually amazing, because if you've seen the live stream video I guess that I did a while ago, I actually farmed story for almost 6 months straight every day, and it was a real hassle, even though I got tons of good stuff from doing the mode. The archive collection system is actually pretty interesting and a good addition to the game, but in my opinion, the premium item costs to unlock some of them is unnecessary, and unless we get more of those premium items coming in after the anniversary, they should probably consider replacing those for something that the majority of players have access to. Anyways, that's my insight on the current patch, despite the fact that there are tons of bugs that they hopefully have to fix pretty promptly. Moving on to the testing, all of the fights that I did were with no damage proc, so I either had an invincible obelisk or an invincible CTP. I also wasn't fortunate enough to get his artifact, so if I did have access to that, he could probably get around 20 to 25% more damage, assuming I get a 3 or 4 star, which I believe caps out at 35% when you have a max level 6 artifact. Despite all of that, Hawkeye's damage is actually surprisingly good, and he is proc friendly, so that means that if you're running him specifically for PvE, you can use a CTP of energy, and because he has guaranteed crit rate in his kit, you can potentially also run a CTP of rage. The best part about either of those builds is that they can also function as a kind of hybrid, because he has built-in guard break immunity and penetration to all sources. So you can get dual purpose and use him in PvP as well, though I wouldn't necessarily recommend those CTP of energy or rage for PvP builds. In terms of which build to go with, a CTP of energy would likely be better in things like World Boss Legend, since you can reforge the CTP, and because he has a lot of skills that can basically be cancelled and layered on top of one another. But if you decide to use the character in point-based modes, so something like ABX or Squad Battle, then a CTP of Rage would likely be better and more consistent. You can see that for my standard World Boss Ultimate test on stage 60, with no damage proc, no artifact, and no T3, he was able to finish with about 2 minutes remaining. To give you an idea of how the old uniform compares, with the roughly 2 minutes left, the old uniform was about 12 health bars behind the new one. If you're curious to know what the rotation is for the tests that I did, it's pretty straightforward. All you have to do is use the 5th skill, which you can instantly cancel, and then you go into your 3rd skill, which you delay cancel, you wait till he shoots the arrow, and then you go into your 4th skill. Once your 4th skill is done, you can quickly go into your 1st skill, which you can cancel into your 2nd skill, and stay in that till your other skills are off cooldown. The 4th skill has paralysis on it, which is pretty nice for the World Boss Ultimate fights, since it can help lock down the opponents. The other thing that I noticed is that the 4th skill does seem to have a little bit of weird targeting, since the animation has the character kind of flying around. If the opponent moves, there is a chance that you end up doing no damage because you miss entirely. But like I said, the 4th skill does have paralysis on it, so for the most part versus World Boss Ultimate and other opponents, they end up getting paralyzed and not moving around, whereas if you're fighting characters who have immunity to that completely, like the World Boss Legend fights, then there is a chance that does happen. You can see that versus Proxima, I finish about a minute faster, and that is due to the all defense down that applies from the 5th skill. Hawkeye's T3 upgrade is pretty solid. It isn't anything outstanding, but it is pretty good compared to most other speed types. The health upgrade isn't as massive as some of the higher end speed types, but it is good nevertheless. With this upgrade, he gets about 12,000 damage increase, at least for my account, and roughly around 25 to 26,000 health increase. Once you get the T3 unlocked, it'll be the skill that you end up finishing your rotation on, because the skill can't be cancelled. It could potentially be partially cancelled, but it does so much damage that you do not want to cancel it. So with that said, the rotation with the T3 would be 5 cancel, 3 delay cancel if you have a rage, or instant cancel if you have something like CTP of energy, and then 4 cancel, 6. The reason that I say delay cancel on the 3rd for a rage is because you can wait to get that arrow hit, whereas you can't if you have the energy, because you can risk accidentally proccing on that instead of the ultimate skill. You want to cancel the 4th skill last before going into your 6th, because it does give you a damage increase to your next skill, and you want to cancel that very quickly so you don't accidentally activate it on the 4th skill itself. But you can see that with the T3 upgrade, I get about a minute and 20-second improvement versus not having it. Hawkeye's damage in PvE is actually so good that even without the damage proc, I was able to bump up the level to stage 99 of Thanos, and only finished about 40 seconds behind, even though I went up 39 stages. Characters that I can clear a stage 99 with no damage proc is usually a good indicator that the character is very strong PvE wise. And then similarly in the Proxima stage, I also had a 1 minute improvement and finished it in 40 seconds. Similar to my other videos, I also took him into World Boss Legend because it's usually a better indicator of the character's raw damage, specifically because the opponent or boss is not susceptible to all defense down that ignores immunity. Besides that, there's less interruptions, so you can get full rotations off and see how much potential damage one full rotation can do. With that in mind, if you want to go for a full optimized rotation where you use the 1st and 2nd skill to fill up your ultimate faster, the rotation that I used would be 1 and 2 cancelled right away to fill up that ultimate. Then you go into your 5 cancel, 3 delay cancel, 4. Once you finish that part of the rotation, the next one will give you your ultimate. So you want to do your 1 and 2 cancelled right away to again fill up that meter a little bit more. And then you go into your 5 cancel, 3 delay cancel or cancel, 4 cancel, 6. Basically, by using these 2 rotations back to back, you should be alternating between proccing on your 4th skill or proccing on your ultimate skill if you have a single skill damage proc, like an energy. Again, you can get an idea of how well Hawkeye performs, since I only have a simple 30% damage increase leadership and no support. Yet he still finishes with 2 minutes remaining. Because he did so well, I decided to try him out on stage 19, this time only adding Taskmaster as a support, and I was able to finish about a minute behind, but still with a minute remaining, meaning that he could push even to a higher stage, still with no damage proc and with no artifact. Because I didn't have access to the character in a World Boss Legend 19 of Knull, I decided to take him versus a World Boss Legend Mephisto stage 24, where I did have access. Fortunately, this time I had a better leadership, since I could use Maya Lopez's or Echo's leadership that gave you 60% increased damage to speed types, as well as Wave's support with an insight. Even though the time comparison isn't 1-to-1 with Knull, that obvious type advantage really helped me in this fight, since I was able to complete stage 24 with about 30 seconds remaining. And like I mentioned before, being able to even complete stage 24 or close to 25 with no damage proc should give you an idea of how well this character performs in PvE. Since if you've seen the video that I made for Makari when she came out, I was able to complete around the same stage with no damage proc as well, and we all know how good Makari is. Even though Hawkeye doesn't really meet any hard requirements for ABX, since I believe that most people are reaching the score limit with either Luna or Makari in the Speed Hero days. I still decided to take him in ABX to see just what he could score. Unsurprisingly enough, I was able to score around the 8 million mark, about 8.2 to be exact, and if you are unaware, I was able to score that also for Kingpin, and with a full build, I believe that people score around the 10 to 11 million mark, or maybe a little bit more with him. So for Hawkeye, you should probably be expecting somewhere around that score as well. In fact, for me, he was performing a bit better than Kingpin, so I would expect that people can potentially hit the cap with him with a full build. Just as a quick note, I noticed that with this patch, the debuff leadership wasn't really working correctly on some characters. So for ones like Sentry, Thanos, and Silver Surfer, it wasn't really working properly. But for characters like Molecule Man, I believe that it was still fine, even Doom. So the results that you see, you have to take kind of with a grain of salt, since Hawkeye, Kate, and Echo's new uniform, Maya Lopez, does have a lot of paralysis in it, which could influence the outcome of what you see. As a result, I did multiple tests versus the same opponents just to see the consistency of the character's performance. I did find that Hawkeye was pretty good, but noticed that his kit was a little bit clunky in PvP because a lot of his skill animations are either slow or have kind of a delay to them. So he could potentially use something like his 5th skill or his 3rd skill, but there is the chance that he could potentially die before those skills are fully cast, or he gets interrupted with his 3rd skill counter, and he doesn't really do the counter skill at all. Funny enough, even the heal on the 3rd skill is delayed, which is a little bit unfortunate since I was hoping it would function similar to Spider-Man's, which activates right away when he does the iframe counter. Regardless of this, you can see that the character is pretty solid all around, since I'm able to take down characters like Sentry, Warlock, Doom, and even Thanos, but ironically enough, he still dies to Lord Colossus, or at least his reflect damage, mostly due to the residual damage from the 5th skill just being there and Colossus reflecting it back. Now, even though the character is solid, I would say that he's probably not going to be up there for timeline at least, because of the 2 reasons that I mentioned, one of them being that his skills are kind of slow and he could potentially die before doing anything, and because of that 3rd skill counter iframe being very slow and also being able to be interrupted, basically leaving him with no iframe ignore. With that in mind, if you're building the character for PvP, either Timeline or Alliance Conquest, you have a lot of options to work with. Because he has that built-in guard break immunity, you could go with a CTP of Transcendence, which is what I would be using if I had a mighty one that I could equip on him, but I'm currently using a CTP of Authority with that steal effect, which I have to say synergizes surprisingly well with his kit because he doesn't have damage accumulation, and because his skills are delayed, it's likely that he will take damage and activate that accumulation portion, meaning that when the skills do hit, they will hit a lot harder with that damage buff active on them. To add to that, if you are able to reforge the CTP and get that steal effect, that ability to not be guard broken or super guard broken will make it so that the counter skill or the iframe counter skill will rather be more consistent in hitting. The AI rotation does focus the 5th skill first and then the 3rd skill when the opponent iframes usually, but the 5th skill does have 5 seconds of invincible on it, which means that if you're running a CTP of Transcendence or Authority, the invincible portion of it at least could potentially be a little bit redundant. This means that you can go with a CTP of Regen if you wanted. His health pool is pretty decent for it, but the heal, like I said, on the 3rd skill is a little bit delayed, so it could make it a little bit inconsistent. And then finally, if you want to go for the hybrid option, you can go with a CTP of Energy or even a Rage, because you have that built-in guard break immunity and penetration to all sources. However, because his skills are kind of really delayed, I'm not really sure the 5 seconds of invincible will cut it, and he will be kind of vulnerable most of the time when that invincible isn't up. Finally, if you want to use the character for manual, you have some pretty good skill options. You're mostly going to be using your 5th skill for that invincible and the high AoE damage, and the third skill for that iframe ignore, as well as the heal. Besides that, if you're facing opponents that have reflect, you can also use the fourth skill, which does also have a lot of damage and is a long iframe skill itself, meaning that you will be immune to reflect damage while you're in it. Fighting certain characters like Spider-Man, it's going to be a little bit of a problem because he iframes a lot, and when you try to do your iframe ignore counter skill, you need to get hit for that damage to activate. But when you get hit with Spider-Man's iframe skill, he has that web and super guard break on it, which means that you won't be able to activate the third skill. So you're mostly just going to be using the fifth skill and third skill to heal up, and when Spider-Man comes out of his iframe ignore, he's going to get hit by that pool of AoE damage from the fifth skill, and then hopefully you can finish him up with the third skill or the fourth skill when he's out of that iframe. Other than that, for the most part, you're going to be using the fifth and third like I said, but for characters like Warlock, you might want to use the fifth skill and then kind of run away, since if you hit him when he has his iframe ignore skill, his second skill up, he could potentially one-shot you with it. It's probably not going to be an easy win for you with the character regardless of the opponent that you play, which is one of the reasons why I mentioned that he's likely not going to see too much timeline use. And that's pretty much my review for Hawkeye. He seems to be amazing for PvE, and ironically not as amazing for PvP, even though he is pretty solid. Regardless of that, he likely won't really see much use in timeline, but he should be a very strong addition in Alliance Conquest, specifically because of that high damage AoE skill that has penetration to all sources. Unfortunately, Alliance Conquest hasn't started, so I am not able to test him at the moment, but I definitely will be and will share my results in future videos. For a character that is kind of free-to-play friendly, since you only really need his uniform to make use of him, he is one of the better ones up there, and comparing them to the other three characters, which you obviously haven't seen yet, but you'll see in the future videos, I would say that he is the better of that group, and would likely recommend getting him over the other ones first. That pretty much wraps up this video. As always, thank you for your time and watching. Please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this video if you did enjoy it. But the video is now over.